What if we could raise awareness regarding unhealthy social norms, regarding a few simple steps for family cohesion and wholeness? I'd like to welcome Danny, Benjamin, and Maxie to the Design Your Legacy podcast this lovely Friday. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, Angelina.
Thank
Happy
you.
to be here.
Yes, yes, it is an honor to host all three of you. You're joining from Switzerland from across the pond. So welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So maybe we'll just, I'll do this in alphabetical order. Maybe Benjamin, you could start with an icebreaker for a couple of sentences, and then we'll move to D for Danny, and then Maxie for M.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. It was about a quarter, 3/4 of a year ago. I reached out to Maxime and then Danny. We had separate conversations, and I invited them to meet me in Zurich for a coffee. And I already had this idea of a family office roundtable, and didn't know exactly how it was going to land. But then meeting these two gentlemen, I realized that we we all have a passion for helping families, and they are much better than me at giving the idea of how we are doing this in Switzerland, in actual physical in-person meetings. I'm a psychologist. I have my own personal history of family dynamics, and I'm proud that we can share with you and your listeners today a little bit of what we're doing. Very happy for this conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, and over to Danny for D for an icebreaker.
Yes, yes, thank you. Well, let me quickly make a recap where I come from because it's a bit odd that I'm, as an entrepreneur, entered this field. I'm a second generation entrepreneur, took over the family company, sold the company, had all the turmoil within the family that you can think of in such an event, and found myself now advising entrepreneurial families and families of wealth on the non-financial capital side, because at the end of the day, that's the thing that we're also going to talk today about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And one of the things I'm just going to share before Maxie jumps in is during our icebreaker, we brought up how oftentimes individuals that have means, whether they're individuals or in the context of their family, have yet to see the return on investment to consider the soft skills and to develop in terms of, we call it personal development, inner growth, personal, there's so many different phrases for it, but yet it really truly is the soft skills that are not very easy sometimes to master because it takes quite a bit of self-reflection and so forth. But we're going to jump into that. All right, over to you, Maxie, for M.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm an educator. I work with the next generation of wealthy families to prepare them in terms of skills and mindsets for the inheritance, right, for succession. I am originally educated and worked as a lawyer. And after my MBA, I was in wealth management here in Switzerland. And I saw this need for education, right? I saw that there is a lot of next gens who have a strong desire to contribute to their family business and the management of the family wealth, but don't necessarily have the tools of how to do it. So that's basically what I do. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think that there's a valuable range of experiences here to bring to this topic because one of the things we planned is the intention also around how do we bring this to a listener so that they can understand it in financial terms. So with that, I'm going to jump into the first question. So how can individuals as well as families begin to assign financial value, quotes, to non-financial outcomes, such as preserving family unity, protecting emotional capital, and so forth, when those are often the most expensive losses in a legacy transition? And we can start with Benjamin for B if Benjamin's ready.
I should probably say that I'm going to speak the least of all the three of us because I I honestly want to say I don't have the background in the experience that Danny and Maxime have it, right? I want to contribute to the entire industry, and maybe we'll cover that towards the end. And if not, I'm going to be more of an observer here, how we can bring the industry together and create intimate spaces where the skill of listening, of soft skills can be learned. That's kind of where I see myself. Whereas in these questions that you're going to ask, I will softly send it over to Danny.
Danny.
So let me take that one. I mean, because this is basically the big question here. How can we make these things understandable, especially without getting directly into any emotions? For family members, for families, but also for advisors, there is a huge fear not getting into these emotional discussions, into these emotional states, because you deal with the law, with financials. You want to deal with these kind of things, and you want to rationalize these kind of things. But your question is, I mean, how can we make this feasible for everybody to understand? And the thing is, you have to think of family risks as drivers for financial loss. So you have to come from a risk perspective, from a risk management perspective, and you have to think of the whole thing as, how can I mitigate certain risks? And risk, as you know, you have a certain kind of value that stands there, and usually it's the financial capital of the family, and you have to ask yourself, what happens if certain events occur, and what's the risk of them occurring, and what's the risk if this occurs and we will suffer in this or that way. So our biggest thing to do, and also in the circles with the advisors, because we're talking to advisors, we're talking to families, to make everybody understand that it's a certain kind of duty to them, to the advisors, but also to the family in terms of family cohesion, to talk about these risk factors and to talk about them also from a financial standpoint, and caring for them maybe the same way as they care for the company or the operating company.
Thank you. And I absolutely agree. I think when these business owners, whether they're principals or advisors, understand risk, because that's where they're operating from. If I make this decision, not only is what is the return on investment, but what is it that I'm gambling in terms of what they call calculated risks. And these days, more and more, we are making calculated risks, because even with rising generation members coming up and saying, oh, I'd like to invest in cryptocurrency, and the founding generation could say, what? I can't hold it in my hands. It's not real and tangible like real property. All right, over to you, Maxi, please.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've observed with families in my experience is that there is this black box of, I don't want to deal with this. And in the black box of, I don't want to deal with this, well, there are no consequences because I don't want to deal with them, right? And I think when you start a little bit by taking out the emotional, right? And you just say, from a risk perspective, if you leave, for example, for 6 months, right? And you don't have Wi-Fi and you don't have cell, nothing, you cannot be reached. What happens to your company? What happens to your assets? Everything that you worked for so hard, right? What's going to happen to them? Because I think the reality is that you can basically, if you want to quantify the risk, right? In my experience, you can do two things. The first thing, you can talk about direct risks, right? For example, a very obvious direct risk is if your children are not aligned in terms of their inheritance, there will be litigation. With these kind of sums, typically litigation is coming. That has a very direct cost, right? Famously, the Pritzker family, for example, had almost $500 million in legal fees. But then the other thing is what do you lose in terms of opportunity, right? And there are some studies. I read one on Chinese-speaking families, right? And the performance of the company compared to the industry average during the time of succession, right? And it was significantly lower, right? Basically, the study showed that on unregulated succession, and basically, so to speak, unsuccessful from that perspective successions, they do have a very clear opportunity cost. And it is not hard to imagine, right? If there is a family is fighting over the company for 5 years and there is no defined leadership and or at least ownership, and then maybe even from a management perspective, leadership, right? It's hard to imagine that the company will be performing very, very well. And business owners, when you put it in these a little bit more concrete terms, it's my experience that it clicks a little bit. They start to understand, okay, I do see now what's the real kind of danger here, apart from just my children are not getting along, and this is a lot of emotional stuff that I don't like to talk about.
I would like to, I would quickly like to add one more point, speaking to that and taking the advisor's view. I mean, basically the financial advisor of the families. And this is probably something that Max has as a bigger knowledge, is there are various statistics that say that heirs are taking their money somewhere else, meaning that children of patriarchs are having their own financial advisors, having their own financial connections, are not really connected maybe to the family office, and are very prone to disrupt the existing system also for the current advisors. So having an alignment in the family and having also the children understand what service is being given also to them from the family office, from the structure that is maybe in place, and maybe at the end even being able to adopt this to the future generation, is also for the advisors, from the risk perspective, something that has to be mitigated. Because if they lose the family in the next generation, I mean, then basically, the family office, you're an owner's office, and as soon as the owner is gone, you close down.
Yeah, absolutely. And like piggybacking on something Maxi said, that founder or the responsible party can leave for vacation or leave for some reason to take care of outside business. And all of a sudden that crisis could happen if they're not there and they're the only one that really truly knows how to handle it, given their life experiences and business experiences. You could just watch the pressure crumble on the shoulders of the rising generation. Because again, when those disasters happen, whew, I mean, it's fast. I mean, sometimes the commercial world is like a battlefield, even if we don't want to think of it like that because we're moving more towards a collaborative society. But yes. Okay, let me move on to the next question. If you were to think of holistic legacy planning as an investment portfolio, what's the ROI of making time early for emotional due diligence, what's known as those, quote, difficult conversations, rather than waiting until a liquidity event, such as a sale, or a succession crisis to force these, quote, very needed conversations? Who would like, Benjamin or Danny? B or D?
Well, so I mean, basically, the earlier the better, because at the end of the day, I mean, you have to see certain kind of things that they just require training at the end of the day. I mean, just to be able to communicate with each other, it's not something that we learn from one day to the other. I mean, these are learned patterns, and these are things that we just have to practice. I mean, it's like playing the piano or tennis or whatever. The more the better, right? So the earlier you talk also already about simple things and include maybe also everybody on the table. This gives a total different dynamic. This gives a total different also family system that is already used to talk about certain issues. And if you ask at the end of the day, when should I talk to my kids about money? Well, at the end of the day, that's a question for Max, but I would say the earlier, the better.
And over to you, Maxi.
Yeah, I think so. So there are a couple of things. The first, if you think of ROI, the first thing you need to understand is that the typical entrepreneur expects that the succession process could happen, a handover process, in 2 to 4 years. That's an EY statistics from a couple of years ago. And they basically measured that for a successful succession, a mouthful, you need actually 5 to 10 years, right? So the first thing that people really underestimate is the time horizon, right? The second thing is, in terms of pure ROI, if you're an advisor, the ROI is very clear. This is something that Danny mentioned, right? Is that more than 80% of rising gens leave their parents' advisors within 12 months. If you just look at AUM, the assets under management that you have, And if you think, okay, 12 months compared to even like 24, 36, whatever the number is, the longer, obviously, the better. What's the loss there? You do a very simple calculation, right? But I think what you really need to consider is the way I like to make it as, let's say, real as it's possible. The biggest loss that you will have if you don't have a governance system and a succession plan, apart from litigation fees, which is very obvious, right? Is if you think about it, your wealth is like fire. Imagine like a big fire, right? And everyone is around that fire and everyone feels warm and it's bright and it's good and it takes care of everyone, right? And if you essentially all you need to keep up this fire is just put logs on it, right? Which is wealth management essentially and some investments, right? If everyone takes out their logs, so basically the wealth is distributed into however many hands, right? And there is this natural dilution, you also have to see that the costs will also rise. Now, everyone needs an accountant, everyone needs a lawyer, everyone needs, right? And the amount of things that you can do, because as financial advisors and business entrepreneurs also know, the more money you have, the more opportunities you have, right? And the bigger the pile. So basically, by taking apart this, which is a natural part of an unsuccessful, of a badly went succession, right? That everyone will try to just get theirs and that's it. You essentially create multiples of cost. So that's the other. So when you think about the ROI, you have to think, what could I achieve with, let's say, 200 million versus 5 times 40 million? And typically, the return is significantly lower.
I would like to use this nice picture of the fire with just explaining, because we have now this nice picture of having a campfire and everybody's putting logs in. What we're not doing, just to be clear, neither Max nor me, we're not bringing out the guitar and we start all to sing Kumbaya around the fire and we're all friends and best, and bring out love. If this happens, great. If this doesn't happen, also okay. What we're doing is bringing in a system, a structure, so we understand and we're managing to putting on logs into this fire and stay together in a big fire. So this is as Max put it beautifully, the biggest fear is that people start taking their logs out. I mean, number one, from the advisor side, but also from the family side, because everybody understands that a bigger fire at the end is having, it's protecting you more as a whole. And that's the picture that you have to have in mind when you're thinking about it. You don't have to have in mind that we have to have family cohesions in terms of we all need to love each other. We are not kind of therapists or
psychologists,
sure. Psychologists. No, we're trying to show them the financial benefits at the end of the day of dealing with these issues. Of course, you will have to have maybe difficult conversations, but you have to be aligned at the end. And that's the goal that the family should have for itself, for preservation, but also the advisor should have, this kind of picture in their head when they're saying, okay, I want multi-generational success for the family of my client.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, Maxi brought up governance. And I think a part of it is we're not therapists, we're not psychologists, but what's interesting that can happen sometimes is amazing governance documents, and then can we play nice? What's in writing is amazing in the four corners, but then can we play nice if we have a bunch of individuals in a room that want to test that framework and test the boundaries and test those words? Like, well, it says that, but do I really have to check in? It says that, but do I really need to adhere to shared values and a shared vision? Until someone really, calls them out. And I think it's human nature to test. But let me move on along to the next question. When family members, and thank you for smiling, Danny, at that, because I know you're going to share something in a moment. When family members delay addressing emotional liabilities, what are the typical financial consequences that you have seen in terms of value erosion, lost trust, or even the idea of trust and closeness in relationships? And Maxi or Danny can start out.
Yeah, I think I'll start. The biggest one is because I work with rising gens primarily, so with the next generation of these families, it's disengagement. And you have to understand that if you have disengagement, if someone doesn't know how to manage their wealth, money is an amplifier. It amplifies everything in its way, right? If you are a bad manager, you can lose it very quickly. It's almost baffling how big numbers can evaporate in seconds, right? It can also do a lot of harm. And what I experienced is then there are unhealthy relationship with money and wealth and what we inherit, and all kinds of reactions. Some people are beginning to just not engage with it. Some people proactively want to just get out of it, right? Give it away, whatever it is. The issue is that you will have a destruction of wealth to a certain extent, right? In a very short span of time, right? Because the fire, coming back to it, it does need some maintenance, right? It does need some attention and understanding what makes it work, at least to a certain degree. Like, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be able to yourself create such a thing, but how to sustain it, maintain it, and what you can use it for is important. So I think when we avoid these difficult conversations, what happens is the emotional, let's call it surplus, right, that we have, and a lot of it's in our imaginations, right? We're like, oh, he definitely meant that. This is why he doesn't give me this, right? And you're like there, and so it's all kind of brings this negativity and animosity towards the family and the wealth, and that's, in my experience, the quickest way to basically destroy it.
Yeah, over to you, Danny. And absolutely, those feelings and emotions are like that iceberg underneath the water. If you don't address it sooner than later, it's going to build. Okay, over to you, Danny. Your thoughts.
The first thought that comes into my mind is we have to broaden our thinking when we're talking wealth. It is not just financial. And Max said it again very nice, with the word engagement means also inner family engagement. So it doesn't mean that you have to engage with an active company or the family office and you have to deal with all these things, but you have to engage with the family somehow, or else you're gonna, as soon as you don't know who's sitting around the table, why do you need these people? You live your own life, you have enough money, all fine, right? But then back to the picture of the fire, which I really love, is okay, so everybody starts his own fire. It's just smaller and, it's okay. But you have to be aware that if you want to keep this together, all these other wealth factors, like the human capital, like the social capital that the family has, it just adds to the total wealth. And just looking at the financial is just not enough, because at the end of the day, it's like a friend of mine told me about startups. Startups never go bankrupt. The owners fall apart. And in a family, it's very simple. It's very often the same thing. They don't really go bankrupt, but the ownership, they fall apart. The family falls apart. And sometimes you cannot prevent it, and sometimes you can maybe hold it together for longer, but you have to work on that field.
Yeah, absolutely. So, moving along from a governance standpoint, how do you help an individual or a family quantify or quote, price in this risk of silence? Because silence can make people, like Maxi said, come up with things in their head, and then they're finding evidence to support that perspective. Okay, when avoidance of key conversations might cost them not only capital, but also their cohesion. Maxi, would you like to speak first on this?
Sure, yeah, thank you. So from a governance perspective, what happens very often in these families is that there is no real governance. Sometimes there is paper that has some words on it. It's nice. I used to be a lawyer. I like to draft documents, right? It's nice exercise. Having said that, the issue is that if you want to have a living document that actually has an effect on the family, then you also have to understand that you need to have these conversations with the family, and you have to be willing to listen to others. Oh my God. Oh, not that. Just not that. Jokes aside, right? Because disengagement comes from a lack of participation, especially in the rising generation, right? If I was never heard, and only less than 30% of succession plans were developed together with the rising generation. So, statistics are not good so far. Why would I like something and engage with something and adhere to something that I had no say in? It makes no sense. So when you have these silences and principals say, I don't want to deal with this, I tell them that that's fine. I understand. You have to understand that your inaction is not just purely inaction. You are also basically signing a contract that your children will have difficulties. Maybe, right? It is a contract that you're willingly signing right now. And you have to be aware of this, that by not dealing with this, you leave them no tools and no rules and basically no solutions. You're giving the wealth, but not how to deal with this, right? I'm giving you a Ferrari, but you don't have driver's license.
Or the manual.
Yeah, or the manual, right? If you think that's okay, this is a responsible decision and you're comfortable with this decision, good. All the power to you. It's your money and it's your family, right? But just understand that avoiding the questions doesn't mean that they cease to exist.
Danny?
Yeah, I was writing down the word inclusion because, if you want engagement, you need to include the family members in the discussion. I wanted to add also something else, which very often in my conversations with family members is a point where, you usually start talking about numbers or things that went maybe wrong and should be renegotiated. But the issue is that usually you don't talk about the real subjects. So, and then the real subjects at the end of the day are very, very simple. Do you want to have any contact, any kind of relationship with your children or with your parents or with your siblings? And if so, how? Because if you negotiate about, okay, what's my part of the inheritance? Is this, I need to know where we stand and I need to know my position, which is super difficult conversation per se. What are we starting to negotiate or talk about? How is it being perceived? What does the child wants my money? And all of a sudden we have either you do this or you don't get anything kind of discussions, or not even getting to that. But people don't really understand what they're dealing with and what they're negotiating about. And this comes from both sides. It comes from the parent side, it comes from the children's side, it comes from all sides if you want. And if you don't include these people around the table into a conversation about their expectations, maybe also their fears, because at the end of the day, it's very often fear that leaves people freezing. Not doing anything means not having not having any say, or not having any decision made, means also I'm having fear of this moment where I have to deal with the consequences. So let's not touch the whole thing. Let's not talk about it. Yeah. So you leave it be. But this, at the end of the day, is going to haunt you down and it's going to cost you sooner or later.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of a Canadian psychologist named Jordan Peterson who said one time that sometimes parents don't even like their children. And sometimes the children, even as adult like offspring, don't like their parents. I see Maxie laughing at this one. So sometimes that, it's a coaching school called naming it. Sometimes we just have to name the pink elephant in the room. And they need to get over, perhaps if they don't like their child, if their child didn't make a certain decision or didn't reflect their family. image well, or the all of the nuances. If I go back to the idea of the iceberg underneath the water, and so sometimes it's bringing that up because you're right. There's a lot at stake, and there's a lot at the table, starting with the relationship itself, separate from the money. And Maxie also is absolutely right when it's like a split second, and the money's there, and then there one decision later, something can happen, and people have a lot of emotions when it comes to money. If that family member made them lose money, I mean, sometimes it doesn't matter if it's a nickel. Okay, let me go on to the next question. Every family seems to have what we could call red lines, sensitive boundaries tied to identity, fairness, or past wounds. How do you design a process where these red lines can be acknowledged without triggering emotional bankruptcy, defensiveness, or offensiveness? Would Maxie or Danny like to take this first?
Yeah, sure. My experience, and I typically, so to speak, represent the children within the family. So I might have a biased view. I'll have to admit that, right? But what I see very often with these red lines is that there are some underlying issues, right, that causes these reactions. Typically some past experiences. And with these red lines, what I have seen, sometimes, of course, these are beyond what you as a, for example, educator like myself can deal with, right? And it's fine. But very often, what I found is that if you simplify it a little bit, what really happened, right? What causes this reaction right now? What is that's bothering you? Then you contextualize, you simplify, you contextualize, because what's very often happens is, especially the silence part, the void is start to be filled with all kinds of emotions and all kinds of images that are not even there, right? He definitely said it because of this. I know that this is how he feels about myself. I was like, did he tell you this? No, he didn't. So, but I know, right? But no, you didn't know. And then you break it down a little bit. And what I basically teach to my students, some of them are older than me, is that essentially, and this is like basic negotiation, right? If you only focus on like the top 10% of what you want, like the absolute best scenario, and the other person also focuses only on their best absolute scenario, when they get everything, it's very unlikely that you will find basically a zone of compromise, right? But if you expand your vision, if you stop for a second, you ask yourself, what do I really want to achieve here? Okay, I have my red lines. I understand. Yes, yes, yes. But I want to achieve here something, right? Do you want your family's wealth to fall apart? No, I don't want that. Okay. Neither your parents, by the way. There you go. First probable good, good point of contact, right? But then you're like, okay, what else? And you find, what I have found is my job, kinda, a lot of time is to find the points of connection and the zone of compromise for both parties. It is coming up with solutions. For example, I give you a very popular example. I have a student who is a musician, right? And he was like, I don't care about investments. I was like, yeah, but your parents really want you to care about investments. And then we talked, could you be interested in music royalties? Right? There are a lot of hedge funds and other investment funds that are doing investments in royalties. Oh, that sounds wonderful, right? Maybe it's also philanthropy. Find a common interest, a common ground that achieves a solutions. And this is the advisor's kind of art and their job, right? To come up with solutions that take everyone's desires and find some vehicle through which it can be achieved. And I think if you don't do that, and then the red lines soften up, right? Because acknowledgement is in, and reciprocity. And then it turns out that actually we're not that far away from each other as we thought. There is a common tissue, right? I think that's one of the things that helped me in my job.
Very cool. And over to you, Danny.
I think you said again something very similar to what I wrote down, because what I'm very often find myself when I'm kind of moderating within the family is I'm translating what one generation says to the other. I'm like in the middle there somehow, and you have to think about it as, and Max also said that everybody has actually goodwill when we start this process. but we don't understand each other. And as Max said, the father will say, or the mother will say, listen, I told my kid for 100 times and he doesn't listen, or she doesn't listen, and the daughter or the son said, for the 100th time they come back with this, but they should understand that I want to do it differently. And both of them are right. I just a couple of days ago, I had this conversation with them. Like, all of you are right. That's the thing. We're not negotiating if you're right or wrong. We have to first understand where you come from, what you mean. So you have to kind of translate the language and find, as Max said, a common language. So because you take down the guards, and this and rightfully you kind of take away these red lines, because to be honest, what kind of red lines do we have in our family? If you think about it, what are the things that you're not gonna do? There are not so many, to be honest. I mean, okay, you're not going to get criminal. I'm not talking about these kind of. Everything else is like, did I understand you right? You want this or that, or no? It's not. It's we're not rocket scientists here, and you don't need a rocket scientist in the room, because at the end of the day, it is a lot about the communication that you establish in these rooms and make these people understand, listen, we're all in this together, for good and for bad. And if you don't want to talk about it, okay, but sooner or later, someone here in the room will suffer. You want that? Fine. If not, let's find a common ground and let's talk about this, because everybody, and I'm not a psychologist, and there are others but everybody hurts. Everybody hurts somewhere. Everybody has a story. Everybody has something that happened. That's why we try to do things different, or do it the same, or whatever. But these are things that are staying with us. And even your own partner, if you think, your wife, your husband, they start to get to know these things. And your kids, they grow up in the whole thing, and they take a lot of your history with you. I mean, we know from studies that you take certain kind of traumas intergenerationally with you. And so this is stuff that you have to deal with and acknowledge, at least, and see that, yes, we're all a family, we're all having goodwill, and we try to accomplish something together. If the goodwill is gone, then we're at a different stage. Then we start lawyering. But before that, I mean, let's stay civil, right?
Yeah, I just appreciate what you shared a moment ago, that when every family has those red lines, I think there's something to be said about acknowledging them, bringing them out into the open, because like you said, maybe it's not as big of a deal as maybe somebody thinks. Like, maybe one of those red lines is, well, don't make us look bad. And then one day the adult offspring makes the family look bad, and then they go, oh, we survived that. And people forgot about it, 10 weeks or 10 months later, or whatever it is, because people have a memory these days that's so short, with the attention span of a goldfish. So, okay, as a mediator slash facilitator, as well as advisor in the different hats that we wear, how do you balance any fiduciary responsibilities to protect, let's say, financial assets with the moral responsibilities to preserve the family's relational equity, as businesses and or financial capital can be involved and intertwined? Who would like to take that first, Maxi or Danny?
I think that family comes first. This might be a controversial take for some people. I have a 1000% belief in that. Family comes first. If you have to make a decision between equity and family, you shouldn't be thinking about it even for a second. Responsible parenting does not mean that you need to spend and endorse every whim and everything. But you can repair a business. A very broken family is not something that you want to deal with. And I would take 1,000 times a slump in business performance over a dangerous slump in family performance, right? Because the thing is, and this is something that we forgot at this point. Many families that I work with, I think, forget about this. Family can be a force for good. Like having more people in the room, having ideas, sharing ideas, trying to find a solution is a wonderful thing. Like you have so much more opportunities, so much more resources. A circle, when you really love each other and you have a strong bond, you can rely on each other, right? Work together to build the business, right? And so this is why when there is a questions, right? I sometimes do advise parents to a little bit invest into a not very promising venture, right? Let the kid fail. It's good for them. Let them open up a little bit, right? So it's also a question of, okay, do I perceive a short-term gain or loss, or do I think in a long term, right? And a lot of families like to talk about legacy and multi-generational success, blah, 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 right? But then they're not willing to invest like 2% of their net worth into something. And I'm like, are you really serious about this right now, right? It's think about the long-term consequences of supporting your children or spending on, right, whatever it is that needs to be spent on in order to create that family cohesion and harmony from a long-term perspective. And what's the ROI on that?
Danny?
I think if you look at the S&P 500, the average age of the companies there at the moment are, I think, like 18 years, don't get 18, 19 years, something like that. That's for sure not multi-generational. So I'm always a bit astonished when you have this pure focus on let's preserve the company or let's preserve the financial wealth, because to be honest, multi-generational wealth has to be really, really big. I mean, and we're talking here, we're talking taxes, we're talking inheritance, we're talking, more and more members of the family. After 3, 4, 5 generation, I mean, to be honest, there are not many families left that we know that have this kind of a long history. And that's why I'm always asking myself, okay, what are we trying to preserve? And usually families can be longer together than financial capital can or a company can. And as Max said, the more people you have, the higher the possibility to have another liquidity event or to have another great entrepreneur within the family, because usually the kids of great entrepreneurs are not great entrepreneurs. I mean, there are cases where they are, but usually their role is different. They don't have to be the hero of the story. They have to keep the story going. That's a total different set of skill set you have to have. And one big skill, and this is something that many people don't talk about, is you have to acknowledge that you're not gonna be the hero. Your father or your parents or your grandfather, he's the hero. And probably no one will remember you. Everybody will remember them. And you have to be okay with that, because this is part of what you have to do. And if you want to be Alexander the Great, again, Alexander the Great didn't have an heir. Let's not forget that. Everybody knows about him. He built this huge empire. I admire actually the father of Alexander the Great, who made it ready for him to have this huge success. What afterwards came, no one really knows. So focus on the family, because there is a chance that you will stay together, beside of the fact that it has also proven longevity effect on being social in a social surrounding that is good for you with friends, family. This is helping you. And if you ask someone, how does he want to have his, how does he want to have his 75th birthday? No one will tell you, I want to be alone on my yacht somewhere in the Mediterranean, enjoying the sun. Everybody thinks of the family, a nice place, everybody, friends, everything. So how do you do that? Well, you will have to have 1 or 2 conversations that are going to be hurtful.
Yeah, thank you for speaking into that. If the individual hates their family, then they might want to be alone. But yeah, but absolutely, I hear you. I think that when somebody is realistic, like you said, in managing expectations, maybe then they have to be okay with that. They are, let's say, the artist of the family. I had a conversation yesterday, and the artist of the family then is stepping up to run the family office, and perhaps they're going to bring a new perspective, and that will be dynamic. And that also raises the question of if there is a family of multi-generational wealth, and there is that one family member that's not the attorney, they're not the one with skilled financial skills that are going to be the same type of moneymaker and the capacity to generate, business like with the Midas touch. What value do they still bring to the family? Because maybe they're the Velcro of that family. Maybe they bring something else that is intangible, but is just as equally valuable like gold. And so you don't let them fall through the cracks. Okay. With in families with significant wealth, millions or billions, and I think there's about 1,100 billionaires in the United States. I don't know what the statistics are across the pond. What are a few ways to diffuse tension when one wrong word could feel like a hostile takeover of someone else's emotional territory or could trigger any other invisible ripple effect? Maxi or Danny, who would like to take that first?
Yeah, I think one of the it's not a new tool, but I think it's really, really effective, at least in my conversations, is the three circle method, right? You have the business, the ownership, and the family. And because in normal families, you just have families. And it sounds a little bit bad right now, but what I mean is that you don't have the added complexity of running a business and also a complexity of being a steward of a really big wealth, right? This is just from a technical perspective very different, right? You need to some very specific skills, a lot of structure around it, because it's a big thing, right? It sounds a little bit obvious, but when you think about it and when you live this experience of managing this kind of wealth, it's quite complex and it's quite burdensome, right? And but what happens very often, at least in my experience, almost always in the families that I work with, is when the three worlds are not separated, you have horrible results, right? When we are at a board meeting and all of a sudden we talk about how father treated me 10 years ago. This is not, you have to understand that during a board meeting, he's the CEO, you're a board member, and you have to act accordingly. And you have to separate these roles, right? Because the thing is that when you mix financials with non-financials, you cannot make sense of it. And so based on that, the conversation cannot have a fruitful ending. At this point, if we are mixing motherly love and investment decisions, we are essentially, yeah, please. Yeah, so we are basically getting to the point, right, where it's all just yelling and we just use the investments as a medium for our emotional work. But the emotional work has to be first, right? And this is why a lot of families, when they start working with each other, what they don't understand, they think, oh, we're not good at business, right? I hear this a lot. Oh, me and my siblings, we're not good at business. We need to just learn more and then we'll get better. And I was like, no, you hate each other. You hate each other's guts right now. You yell at each other. This is not a finance question, right? You need to be aligned. James Hughes, he says in his book, right, Keeping It in Family, that the first thing, the cornerstone, is the spiritual and emotional alignment. Everything else comes after, right? This is family first again. And then, yes, sometimes you also need to learn how to manage finances, how to run the business. But separating the three helps a lot. It's a little bit funny, and some people will laugh at this, but I had a family where this really didn't go through. It was very difficult, and I made them to wear hats. And I was like, this is your board meeting hat. Now you are in board meeting mode. You don't talk about emotions, you don't talk about dinner, you talk about financials, results, and responsibilities and decisions that we need to make, right? So yeah, that's kind of
Yeah, I smiled a moment while you were speaking, but I was muted out so there wouldn't be an echo. But I smiled for a moment because I was thinking about that type of conversation where, let's say, that adult offspring challenges or puts, let's say, the patriarch or even the matriarch on the spot, and then there's other people in the room at the table. Oh, that adds to the fun. Okay, over to you, Danny. Your thoughts?
Actually, I mean, Max said it already, so I can just repeat and circle back to something that we said before. We have to practice these kind of conversations. I mean, this is not something, I mean, to be honest, first of all, don't do any of these meetings without kind of a moderator in the room because they're gonna derail. And if you're doing this, it is enormously difficult to keep emotions out in a room where you talk facts. Because as Max said, we want to talk numbers, but you did something to me 10 years ago, and now you're not going to do it on my watch, the same thing, or, these kind of things are not helpful. But you have to, I mean, to be honest, the first family meeting with my kids when they grew up, after I started thinking it would be a great idea to the family, they thought I was crazy. They thought I lost it. We're going to talk now about this and that in a structured form. I mean, come on. But this is something that you have to practice and you have to get into your DNA. And people will always say, yeah, we have a nice family charter. And yeah, no one lives it. Yeah, of course not. Because you wrote something in it where this is not you. You took a template from someone, you put your name on, you signed it, you have a family charter because this is something that one does. But so this is not the way to do it. You have to build up these skills. And yes, you have this openness first and to understand this is the room where I can really express myself and I'm not being judged for it, because sometimes you're the stupidest guy in the room because everybody else is experts and you think you're going to look even stupider if you ask questions, but that's the only way how you learn. And you will figure out the others are probably not that smart in that room, but they pretend much better than you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm aware of the time, so let me know if I can run over a couple of minutes and I can just close us out with two more questions. Okay, great. I thought the question of how do you convince a financially sophisticated client, because we've all been here, that the greatest asset on their balance sheet might actually be trust and their family relations, and that it actually depreciates without active maintenance. Who would like to take that first?
Yeah, I think that if you are, depends what kind of financial specialist you are, right? But I think even in finance, people realize fairly quickly, based on my experience in banking, that it's all about human connection, right? It's always has been, it's always will be, right? It's what can we negotiate, and basically because from a legal perspective, why law exists, right? A little bit philosophical, but it is because to lower the cost of distrust. If I have to every time to check for everything, whether you will adhere to the rules of our engagement, right? It's very costly. It's very difficult. It's kind of time consuming, right? If you cannot trust your family when you make decisions and you think about that every family council or investment committee meeting or whatever it is, right, will be a 2-hour fight, is just very inefficient. And it doesn't, you don't need to be a psychologist to just feel that on a very intuitive level that, look, if we have trust and we also have maybe, God forbid, love for each other, horrible in the family, how dare you, then then maybe things will be easier. Right? And it's then running through the scenarios of what happens if you don't have it is what really happens, because and then you just say to them, look, essentially your family becomes a very dysfunctional management team, board or management, whatever you want to use, right? It's essentially a company that can never make decisions. As a financial analyst, how would you evaluate the success rate and probability for that company? And they would like, zero. That's zero. And I was like, yeah, exactly. So I think that's a framework that could work.
Danny?
I don't want to add much, but just one thought. I mean, at the end of the day, most people don't know what governance is. I mean, because it's a huge word and everybody packs whatever it is into this word. And this sounds like a huge book with 1,000 rules. Cannot move anymore, and I have to do all this stuff that I didn't decide. That's not governance. Governance, at the end of the day, is basically answering the question, how do we decide when it matters and when we're under stress? It's a decision-making tool at the end of the day. So you can easily convince someone with, if he's financially sophisticated, he doesn't need to be financially sophisticated at all. Everybody understands that if we have a process in place that we can just take out and say, okay, that's what we do in a situation like this, no matter what, then everybody knows how to act, because we cannot foresee what kind of emotions come in. But if we have a process that we can like play on, it makes things so much easier and so much more efficient.
Very nice. And so the final question before all three of you share your website, and I'll read my closing paragraph. Final question. I'd like Benjamin to chime in on this one, maybe even go first. What does this word legacy mean to you personally? And in one sentence, what would you like your legacy to be?
Aspect that came up for me multiple times is that as a patriarch or matriarch, or maybe as an heir, or as a financial advisor, you look at what is the net benefit of the people around me. And it is a basic function of your compassion, maybe your wisdom. And you're good at making money, you're good at hustling, you're good at working a lot of hours of adjusting markets and products and what have you not, or hedge funds or technology. And you look beyond that at the planet, at the society, and you ask yourself, how can I contribute? And then you start with your family. You start with creating net benefit for all the individuals in your family, whether that's the musician, whether it's a child that is struggling with mental health, or maybe it's someone you're putting too much demand on them and they're not trained, and you have this compassion of what do I need to give you, and you pay attention, you're mindful. And that's something I have missed growing up in a way. And I feel that my own family just fell apart because of that. And I would like to assemble the pieces back together. And one thing that I found, Angelina, is the best thing I can do is probably help as many families as I can put these broken pieces together. Now, I'm just one single man, and I'm not going to be able to accomplish this mission by myself, because I'm thinking of all the families on the globe. So if we can get joining forces and spread the word, I think for now, I'm going to say that's my answer. That's kind of a legacy I would like to leave.
Thank you. Danny?
Well, I can basically dial into the same legacy. That's why probably we also found each other here in this group. And I mean, for my part, I want to, at the end of the day, it sounds, if you bring out the word legacy in Europe, legacy is some kind of thing that you only have in the US. Something that, only, in big movies, you're going to talk about legacy and purpose and all these big words. And in Europe, we're very, very hesitant using these kind of words. So, the next quarter and the next year of the business, that's important. But our legacy, yeah, okay, I want to leave something. So now coming back to myself, yes, I want to give something back. And I've seen in my lifetime the value of the family. And to take the model of the three circles again, because this is something that everybody knows, you have a very big focus on the company side. You have a huge focus on a capital side, on the financial side. You have a very, very low focus on the family side. And I think it's time for us to have the focus on the family side and make this circle as big as it should be in this concept. So I want to give in my part in making families understand the value of it. And who knows, and also myself and my family to include in this project of mine.
Very nice. Maxi?
I am G to heir, and our succession process in the family wasn't easy or very positive. And I know how lonely it can be to go through that process as an heir. So my goal in this life is to take care of as many children, I'd call them that, as I can. And so they don't feel the way I felt, right? Lost, a little bit confused, often emotionally, you don't really understand what's going on. So I would like my legacy to be a group of happy, smiling, and engaged with their family and their family business and the values that their family has, group of people, right? And I hope that that group is as big as possibly can be.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I just want to circle back, and I can include the websites of all three of you in the show notes. I just, for time's sake, would like to circle back to the intention that we set at the beginning of today's conversation, which was, what if we could raise awareness regarding the unhealthy social norms? And yet there are simple steps that we can all take regarding family cohesion and wholeness. So I'd like to thank all three of you for being a guest today. And it's been a true pleasure that all of us figured out a way to carve out a certain window of time. And it's been a true joy before I read my closing paragraph.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you, Maxi.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
In closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of The Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, USA. But international in those I get to coach and consult. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. If you're tuning in on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, etc., please remember to rate and review, share with your family and friends. And if you feel so inclined, send an email to either Danny, Benjamin, or Maxi, or myself, and let us know your thoughts or feelings about today's content. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you all three for speaking into your legacy.